Welcome back everybody, I'm Nick930, and today I want to share with you my thoughts on Sony's upcoming VR platform, the PlayStation VR2. The PSVR2 is a major step forward for virtual reality technology, not necessarily in what it's able to do in-game, but rather because it's probably one of the more simple and elegant VR devices that I've ever used. So let's start by looking at the general form factor and design of the hardware itself. The PSVR2 headset has a very minimalist design composed primarily of durable white and black shell plastic for the exterior and black rubber for the interior padding and facial interface. It measures out to roughly 11 inches long, 7 inches wide, and 7 inches tall, about what you'd expect for a typical VR headset. Though the additional headband does give it a slightly larger profile than something like, say, the HTC Vive. Because of this bulkier plastic design of the upper headband and rear strap, the weight is a bit more too, weighing in at around 19.8 ounces, or 560 grams. Though this isn't necessarily a bad thing either, as the additional support from the rear helps to counteract the weight of the forward scope perfectly, and prevents it from ever feeling uncomfortable. In fact, this is one of the most comfortable VR headsets that I've ever put on. The rear strap has this nice thick rubber with about half an inch of air between another interior pad, which prevented me from ever feeling like I had some hard plastic pressing up against the back of my head. The front forward strap is similarly padded, though not nearly as thick, and rests comfortably at an angle, preventing slippage. Around the interior lenses, there's this accordion rubber piece that is lightweight and comfortably covers the area around your eyes, which is a nice addition as it perfectly blocks out external light, keeping the image crisp and keeping you fully immersed in the game. The only downside to this bit is that the thin rubber pieces that rest against the nose do feel pretty thin and flimsy, and may be susceptible to damage like tears if not handled properly. The headset piece also has a few buttons and knobs on it. First, we have this button on the top left of the scope, that when pressed in, releases the sliding mechanism to adjust the distance of the scope to the player's face. On the opposite side, we have a lens distance adjustment dial that is used to center the image properly depending on the distance between your eyes. Underneath the scope, there's a built-in microphone input, the main power button, and a pass-through toggle button that will swap between gameplay and a grayscale display of your surroundings. For audio, the PSVR2 has a single auxiliary input located at the rear of the headband, which can be fitted with the included earbud headphones that clip right into the bottom of the band. The earbuds themselves aren't particularly great, as I found them to be really loose in my ears and constantly falling out, but you can always try out your favorite over-the-ear headphones instead and connect them as you always would. As for the image quality itself, the PSVR2 makes use of two OLED displays using Fresnel lenses at a resolution of 2000 by 2040 per eye, with a 110-degree diagonal FOV. This is a huge improvement over the old PlayStation VR. In fact, it's better than most consumer-grade VR headsets on the market, which in and of itself is an impressive achievement for a console-based VR device. What's more, the panel has a refresh rate of 120 Hz, with options for 90 Hz depending on the software. This is about on par with the original PSVR, that also supported 120 Hz, and is consistent with competing high-end VR platforms like the Vive, Index, and Meta Quest 2. One of the coolest new features with the PSVR 2, though, are these interior IR cameras that will track the movement of your pupils within the headset itself. By doing this, developers can design their games to let you do things like select menu options just by looking at them, something that is demonstrated quite well in games like Horizon Call of the Mountain. More importantly, the eye tracking can also be used for something called foveated rendering, that's used to enhance gameplay performance by only rendering areas you're looking at directly in high fidelity, while also reducing the quality of out-of-focus peripheral objects that you'd otherwise not notice. Because of the nature of this technology, it's difficult to really determine if it's already implemented, though it's certainly an interesting idea and could potentially be a game changer in maximizing performance in more graphic-intensive VR titles. On the opposite side of the front panel, there's also 4 external cameras that are used to track the headset's movement within the play space, and allow players to see a pass-through image to navigate safely without needing to remove the headset. It's a big improvement over the old PSVR, which was limited massively by the need for an external PlayStation camera to track the controllers and the headset. And now, the only limit to players is the space that they have to work with and the length of the headset's cable. This cable is, of course, one of the bigger downsides to the PSVR 2. I've been using a wireless adapter on my HTC Vive for the past couple years now, and it's made VR games much more immersive. That being said, the length of the built-in cable for the PSVR 2 is pretty generous right out of the box. And because it's only a single USB cable coming out of the bottom of the rear headband piece, I never felt like it was pulling down on the back of my head like the old wired headsets would do. Overall, the headset itself is a solid design, and the image quality is pristine, with only a tiny bit of that screen door effect noticeable if you really look for it. The other features like IR eye tracking cameras, the exterior tracking cameras, and the built-in rumble are all nice touches too, though there's definitely room for improvement still, as the audio solution isn't particularly great, and the requirement to be tethered is an unfortunate, albeit likely necessary, sacrifice. Even still, the leap from the original PSVR to the PSVR 2 headset is substantial, and reason enough to upgrade if you've been on the fence. The other big reason, though, are these massively improved controllers. The PSVR 2 comes packaged with two brand new Sense controllers. These are very comfortable to use, have fantastic tracking, and come with a lot more functionality than their old PS Move counterparts. Each controller represents about half of a typical PlayStation controller, with one joystick, two face buttons, a menu and PlayStation button, along with a trigger and a thumb button that take the place of buttons like R1 and R2. It is a little awkward at first to grab hold of, as the complex orbit design of the plastic ring looks roughly the same from most angles. But once you have the proper grip, these pads do feel very comfortable, and function great in the few games that I had access to. The trigger has about the same pull length as the DualSense controllers, and the joysticks, while slightly smaller, allow for a full range of typical movement and control in games with locomotion. The Sense controllers also make use of something called capacitive sensors for most of its buttons, meaning that just lightly touching things like the trigger and thumb buttons will act as their own inputs, which is great for games like Call of the Mountain, as this can be used to mimic hand motions in-game. However, I did find that in order to actually hold these controllers, you'll almost always be touching these capacitive sensors anyway, making it difficult to do things like extend your fingers naturally without feeling like you're letting go of the controller. The Sense controllers also don't have the best battery life. You'll probably get about 3 to 4 hours worth of gameplay out of each controller before needing to charge them again. Each controller can be charged manually using an included USB charging cable, just like any other DualSense controller. Though Sony does offer a separate charging station for these Sense controllers that can help to streamline the process further. Other than the low battery life and slightly awkward handling, the Sense controllers are a great addition to the PSVR 2 experience, and are a massive step up from the likes of the old Move controllers. Another major step up here from the older PlayStation VR is the remarkably easy setup. All you need to do is plug in the attached USB-C cable to the front of the PS5, press the power button on the headset, and power on the two controllers. That's it. There's no need to connect an intermediate box, auxiliary power, HDMI, cameras, or any of that stuff. No need for corner base stations or internal PCI adapters. It's just simple plug and play. It makes booting up a VR-enabled title quick and painless. Putting on the headset is about the only involved part of the experience, as you need to first extend the forward scope, loosen the headband, and then tighten and retract the scope to a comfortable distance. And if you still need to put on your headphones or pick up your controllers afterwards, you can peer through the pass-through cameras in grayscale with very little latency. VR2 also uses its built-in tracking cameras to map out the playable space with surprising accuracy, with a 3D geometric layout of every object around me being picked up almost perfectly, just by looking around for a few seconds during the initial setup. You can then adjust play zone borders, which will display in-game once you get close, and even automatically switch to the pass-through cameras if you decide to step out of bounds. It's easily the most streamlined VR configuration that I've ever dealt with, and a major plus considering this is one of the bigger issues that I've had with VR setups like the HTC Vive. Finally, let's take a look at some of the new games launching alongside the PSVR 2 headset, starting with Moss Book 1 and 2. Now, these two games aren't technically new. The original game released back in 2018 for the original PSVR, and its sequel released just last March. But the PSVR 2 release demonstrates the potential of older VR games benefiting from improved visual quality with the in-game assets, higher base resolution, and much better controls. Because the old Move controllers lacked things like joysticks, this game previously required the use of the DualShock 4 controller, with the light on the back being tracked by the PS camera. But on PSVR 2, this game now functions like the PC releases, with full motion controller support to manipulate the environmental obstacles, and things like the joystick and face buttons being used to move Quill herself. It's a really fun platformer game that I haven't had the pleasure of playing before, where you can freely move the camera around by literally looking around the environment. And it's a great experience for gamers that aren't as comfortable with VR motion experiences. Next up, I tried Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge Enhanced Edition. This was one of the premier titles on the Oculus Quest back in 2020, and is more or less the same here on PSVR 2, only with better performance and visuals. In it, you play as a space smuggler that's being hunted down by an alien death gang in and around the Black Spire spaceport, the very same port featured at various Disney theme parks. This is a pretty straightforward VR experience, similar to the kinds of things that I've tried before, and its visuals aren't particularly groundbreaking either. The gameplay involves a mix of puzzle solving, some light gunplay, and a fair bit of environmental interactivity, though the actual experience is relatively short, and the cheesy acting made it feel more like a theme park ride than an actual game. Then we have Horizon Call of the Mountain. This is easily PSVR 2's biggest killer app at the moment, as it's a brand new game built specifically for this headset. This game is absolutely gorgeous, with lush jungle environments inspired by Guerrilla Games' popular Horizon series, complete with cameos from fan-favorite characters, and plenty of familiar robotic creatures. In this game, players assume the role of a Shadow Karja rebel named Ryas, who's sent on a perilous journey through the Sundom Mountains to clear his name. It's a completely new storyline that seems to take place sometime between the first Horizon game and last year's sequel, Forbidden West, though it doesn't necessarily add much to the overarching plot either. Even still, Call of the Mountain does offer a really impressive showcase of what the PSVR 2 is capable of. The game consists primarily of expansive free climb obstacles, where players reach up with the Sense controllers and grab clearly marked handholds to pull themselves up and around cliff sides. It's kinda surreal climbing in virtual reality, as it does feel a little bit like the real thing, minus of course having to use your legs and the risk of falling hundreds of feet. But it's still probably one of my favorite experiences so far with this device, and a great test of the system's tracking precision as well. Between these climbing sequences, players will also need to loot for resources, craft items, and discover secrets, like hidden targets that need to be shot from long distance with a bow and arrow. Occasionally, players must also engage in direct combat with a robotic enemy, which will weirdly lock the player into a sort of circular arena, where movement is limited to strafing and dodging around the border. It's not the best design choice, considering other VR games like Half-Life Alyx didn't force this kind of limitation on the player. Though considering the type of melee-focused enemies players will typically face in the world of Horizon, I do get it, and I did still find these moments to be an interesting break from the constant rock climbing. My only real complaint with Horizon Call of the Mountain is the lack of proper teleportation comfort options in its accessibility settings. The game requires locomotion movement, which really doesn't seem necessary in certain areas. There's a ton of other accessibility options available throughout the game, like a vignette to help make the experience more comfortable for VR sickness-prone players like myself. But I personally didn't find this to be that much help, and can only tolerate this game's movement for 15 minutes at a time before having to take a break. I think offering a teleportation option for these flat ground sections where you explore and loot for resources would help immensely, as I never felt any sort of real motion sickness from things like the combat, the boat rides, or the rock climbing at all. Finally, we have the recently patched in VR mode for Gran Turismo 7. This is probably one of the most impressive games visually in the system's launch lineup, with photorealistic graphics making you feel like you're really a part of the race. And being able to look up and around the cockpit of these incredible vehicles adds so much more than I would have expected. I would, of course, still only recommend this experience to players that can handle this type of motion in VR, as it can feel a bit uncomfortable, even when sitting down with a full racing wheel setup. But for players with the stomach for it, this is probably one of the coolest VR experiences available day one, and it's definitely worth pairing it with your favorite racing wheel setup to really immerse yourself. And then sadly, the only game that I couldn't test out just yet is the upcoming Resident Evil Village VR update, which is set to release sometime tomorrow alongside the launch of the PSVR2 platform. Though, considering the popularity of Resident Evil 7 in VR, and the fact that Resident Evil 8 was a fantastic game all on its own, I'm very much looking forward to giving that game a try soon. So, to wrap up, the PlayStation VR2 is a fantastic piece of tech, with a great form factor, comfortable controllers, and a decent lineup of launch software to accompany it. Games like Call of the Mountain and Gran Turismo 7 are definitely the high points here, with some truly impressive visuals and performance thanks to the use of things like foveated rendering. What's more, there are already many other third-party titles set to launch alongside the device as well, like this VR kayaking game that looks very good. Though it is a shame that this system does not support backwards compatibility with past PSVR titles. Finally, there's the price point. This is definitely the biggest consideration, especially in today's not-so-hot economic climate. The PlayStation VR2 is going to run you $549.99 US at launch, and that's without any included games. You also have to consider that games like Call of the Mountain are priced at $59.99, and you still need the actual PlayStation 5 on top of that. When considering the cost of competing VR platforms with similar high-quality experiences, I think the price makes a little bit more sense. However, it's still asking a lot of gamers, especially non-enthusiasts, to invest in something like this, especially with no clear idea of what exactly we can expect following this launch lineup of games. Right now, I'd recommend the PlayStation VR2 if you're looking for a top-quality VR experience without any of the hassle of the traditional PC VR setup. It's without a doubt one of the simplest VR platforms that I've played with, while still being powerful enough to drive some really impressive-looking games, and is a great addition to the PlayStation 5 library. But what do you guys think? Are you going to be picking up the PSVR 2? If not, what do you feel is missing that would make the purchase feel worth it? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.